outside to make this film. It was not easy. We all donated all of our time and our savings accounts to finish this film. And so, but the good thing is we all know what we're doing. We all have specific jobs that we do in this industry at a certain point, and we know how to do them well. So we got it done, and we got it done within 6 months, and within a year it was started to go into film festivals. So. Can
I add one thing?
Yes.
I also want to say that part of the challenge was finding the right topic, because we wanted to do a film about Palestine and show people a side that they don't normally see. And there was a lot of research that Mouna did, and a lot of Patrick and I also did separately that, went into this, and until we landed on what we thought would be a really kinder, gentler way into the discussion. These are the Palestinians of 48. They're Israeli citizens. These are not, Palestinians in the occupied territories or West Bank or whatnot. So or Gaza. It's a much different situation, and it's a story that's not really told, and it's a voice that's not heard. And we thought it was there's so many films out there where you just see a lot of the strife and a lot of the violence, and we didn't want that. We wanted the Palestinians in this particular community with their issues at hand to open a door to see, as you said, a certain portion of the population and how their struggle is echoed in a larger scale in some of the other places. How it's the same struggle, but with a different color to it. So, but it was a while to sort of figure out what the right story would be.
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering, in terms of the subjects, were there any complications to getting them to give interviews, and did you have to go through release forms, or were they really eager to share their stories?
We drank a lot of Turkish coffee.
Knock, knock, knock.
Well, Patrick and Gina are blonde. So I'm Palestinian origin, and I speak Arabic fluently, and it really didn't take that much once you introduced yourself and tried to explain to them what you were trying to do, and that all the interviews were spontaneous. We just basically show up and present ourselves. We had short windows of time to work, and they would...
But we could say, Macron told us to talk to you. The last, and they
would be somebody that knows somebody.
So well, yeah.
Small town.
Yes, right here.
Gorgeous film. This is really, really moving. And I'm actually wondering, have you shown it to them? And what has been the response and the reaction?
It was a small screening. I was in Akka in 2013 in December, and it was we showed up that morning and knocked on the doors of all the participants and said, "Come tonight," in the tiny theater in town, and they were delighted. They were very excited and very happy. And it aired on Al Jazeera this past month. So I think many of them were able, or many of the people of the town were able to see it on the television. So.
But as you can imagine, we did lengthy interviews with everyone in the film, asking them lots of questions, and what ends up, as usual, is very little with most of them. So some of them came to see the film thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to," and they see one or two moments of themselves, and they get disappointed. But in the long term, in the bigger sense, they saw the film and they realized what was done. They were really, really happy with it. So,
welcome to Hollywood.
yeah.
Question over here.
So it's a really beautiful in the way that it really focuses in on I don't want to say one moment, but on a particular context in a very defined time period or kind of time. How is that situated with what came before, and then also, it's effectively it's telling a story, and it's urging some sort of pathos. What's next? What is the, I don't know. There's a action and then an effect, and I'm just wondering.
I don't know what's next. I mean, I know that there has to be a radical shift in current politics in Israel for there to be any change. But I do know that of all the towns that have sort of suffered the same fate of sort of cultural erasure, and Akka is really a stronghold, and I think it's a stronghold for a reason. I think they're very, very unified, and it's not that they have money or anything, it's pure will. And there's only, 3,000 of them left, so I don't envision that they're going to forever be there. I hope that they will, but I think they will suffer the same fate as Jaffa and other towns if something more radical doesn't happen. So, you know, I don't know how to answer that, otherwise I don't know if you...
I would love to answer that.
Yeah.
In my opinion, what's next depends on what each one of us in this room decides to do tomorrow.
What kind of options?
Where to spend your money, for example.
Yeah.
Vote for.
There's all sorts of things that we as individuals can do. You can check out jvp.org, our website. We are I'll tell you quickly, the only national Jewish organization that's part of the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. We're using these time-honored tools of nonviolence to disrupt violence. We believe that we can make a change by, like she said, deciding what products you buy and what products you don't buy, by calling the 4 people in this country who care about you almost as much as your families, your congressperson, your 2 senators, and the presidential candidate of the party that you are registered for, and let them know how you feel about where our tax dollars are spent and where they're not spent in our own communities. There was a question right up here.
Yeah, so I'm interested in the stylistic devices you apply to convey the message of the film. So there was this metaphor of the jumping for the liberation, and then which other statement?
It's a leap of faith, you know. Well, first of all, the metaphor, as it turned out, the jumping was a rite of passage, and I think we described that in the film. It's not only done by these kids, but by their parents, male and female, and grandparents, and on and on and on. So there was this wonderful thread, multi-generational thread, that we could tie back from these kids on back through, you know, history. And that was sort of perfect, because then we could talk about the rite of passage, describe it as they describe it, as a leap of faith, or a chance that they take, or a necessary step that they've got to make. So it's all of these sort of metaphors that are combined into one that describe the Palestinian struggle.
But also how you broke it down, how we broke it down in passages.
Are you talking about the jumping itself, stylistically?
Yeah.
Sorry, went off on another thing. That's very interesting, because we had a choice to make, which is showing the jumping at the beginning of the film, or at any point from the beginning of the film on to the end of the film. And our choice was, you can't show jumping until the end of the film, because once you show jumping, people are lost. They've seen it, they're not interested in it anymore. You have to keep them interested. So we broke down the jump into 5 different it's sort of like a classical piece or themes. The first theme is the wall. So at the very beginning, we show the wall, and we describe how old it is, how tall it is, how thick it is, and all that stuff. The next part of the theme of jumping are the faces of the kids. And so we look intently at all these kids and what seems to be, their anticipation, what they're thinking about, before they're jumping or just sitting on the wall. Then the next part is just running. So as you notice, we just have running. We don't have jumping. It stops right at the end of the run. They never get into midair. The fourth one is just flying through the air. So it's neither running nor anything else, neither hitting the water. It's just flying through air, flying through air, flying through air. And then finally, it's hitting the water. And as Makram describes, the feeling that you get when you hit the water, and then you look underneath and you see if there's anything dangerous that's nearby. So once we had all of those themes combined, then we can, the orchestra can play the whole piece, and that's where we have the jumping at the very end of it.
I think we wanted also to choose a hopeful metaphor, because, as Gina mentioned, the bleakness of the reality, that one of the main things we wanted to focus on was the future of young people in that society. So we stumbled upon this, and it was very dear and near to our heart. And it is a very big question because it's very precarious at the present. So
I'll just say just one more quick thing. We use that dispersed at about 8 to 10 minute intervals because we're delivering so much information to the audience. And a lot of it is really heavy information, and it's not happy. And if you keep accumulating unhappy, sad, depressing, let's call it information through 75 minutes, you'll walk out holding your stomach and wondering what are we going to do in this world. So we would place that to give each of those little theme segments just a little bit of relief to, okay, take a breath, and then we'll move on to the rest of the information. So,
The young man in the black jacket.
You mentioned there was a lot of very sad information. There was also a lot of very specific information out of specific dates or months of years. How much of that information did you know coming in, and how much did you learn as you researched and as you made the film?
Are you talking about the historical information?
The historical relation between Israel and
I'll
Palestine.
speak for myself. I mean, I think Mouna and Patrick knew a great deal about the history, more than I did. But I wrote it, had to really immerse myself and watch movies, read books, talk to people. And then had to filter out what were the important things, because when you start digging into statistics, first of all, you have to back them up by several sources. And that's really hard when it comes to Israel-Palestine. There's so many sort of people arguing about statistical things. And so you have to choose your sources and then figure out what's really relevant and what you want to talk about, because you could get so angry and motivated, too, talking about all the horrible statistics and facts and figures and death tolls and all the rest. And we really wanted to sort of take what was salient and important. So a lot of the stuff is, how Palestine was, from the British Mandate on, what happened, move through it quickly and sort of show here's the UN saying we're never going to do this. It's never going to be a theocracy. It's not going to be a Jewish state. And then and just sort of say these were the touch points that that led us to where we are today. And we had to move through it rather quickly because it wasn't supposed to be a heavy historical piece, but you want to place Akka in history and in time as well.
it is important though, and I have come to appreciate I kind of dove in, and I've learned a tremendous amount over the last few years. But there are so many resources, as Estee said, to go to our website, ibtj.net, and we have a list of sources that will give you a background, and Jewish Forces for Peace and many, many other organizations, If Americans Knew, and will give you facts of historical, current information that is really, really vital for all Americans, because the difference in this conflict is that as the taxpayer, we are participants in this conflict, and we should know what is happening because it's very much related to what we choose to do.
I agree that it gave a perspective that we hadn't really heard before, and it was very successful in that. And then when my question, you just partially answered it, was that is there a website? And I've seen Human Rights Watch film festivals, and I've been to more film festivals, and I've seen some things really change, like the coffee growers in Ethiopia, some farmers in India, and all based on a documentary film. Like it started a movement, it started a website, and I was just wondering, I think, like Reem, and some of the positive examples from the movie, the theater productions that could really make people enthusiastic, and Reem had her own business. If this film could bring about a website or a movement, something that would expand on Reem's idea of building businesses that give jobs, or online Arabic lessons from Akka, something that could really make a difference where we could just touch it without having, to write our congressman every day and maybe never get anywhere.
It's different in India and other places because they're not living, it's a lot of oppression, but they're not living under a technically apartheid state. That's one big difference. But also, I mean, I will just say as an aside, Reem had to close her business. You know, and it was crazy because it was so beautifully situated right on the water, and it's where all the tour buses pull up. You're talking about hundreds of tour buses pulling up all day long throughout the day, and mostly, you know, foreign or Jewish travelers who are not frequenting her cafe or not going in there because it's an Arab establishment. So she had no choice but to shut down. I think she's now involved in politics and activism, which she's also really good at. But you see what the struggle is. It runs very deep.
So, and to be clear, there is a movement. There's been a movement ever since Israel was established. And there's very much a movement. You can go to bds.org, which is the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, which was a Palestinian call that they said to the world, here, we're taking a page out of the civil rights movement in America and the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and we're calling upon civil societies around the world to join our struggle. So check that out. There is a movement. It's going on. You can be part of it. We are already part of it, as somebody said, because our tax dollars are funding it. Right here?
I was wondering what the choice of the various characters throughout the film were. Like, did you develop the storyline and then ask all these people to interview, or was it you had all these interviews and you pieced it together?
There were themes. There were themes we knew we wanted to talk about. And at first we thought we were going to just follow a couple of families on the ground and sort of the sort of dramatic arc in their lives and what would happen, and because these families are so embedded in Akka. And we don't live in Akka. We're thousands of miles away. We're in Los Angeles. And so being on the ground there to do a kind of, a more verite style piece was really, really hard. And so we just started going from originally maybe just a few people to talking to more and more. And then we realized everyone had something really pretty important to say. And there were a wonderful cast of characters. And, it did become a movie more of talking heads than we had envisioned, but I think that's all right. At the end it was sort of, what's important is letting them have their voice and get their own message across. And it was built thematically. So I drew up the questions, and then we would ask each person the same set of questions, and if that took us in different places, we'd go there. But, so then the film could be organized that way.
Right here?
One thing about pressuring Congress people to vote for 1.5 billion, that's with a B, or nine free commas, for the state of Israel's military has been unanimous. That is not a single dissent ever from the Congress to fund Israel's doing what it is doing. There was a bit of dissent about the Prime Minister speaking this morning, which would be part of my question, but to think that as far as alternatives, in front of the Israeli consulate, there's a curb that's 1% of the height of the wall, which you could step onto when there's a protest and hold signs against Israelis' policies, which I would extremely recommend to keep people's eyes and ears for when you see it posted on bulletin boards at this and other campuses.
That's great. Do you also have a question for the filmmakers?
The question is, what was your perspective on today's speech by Netanyahu, content and reaction?
I need my phone for 1 second. Okay. I laughed, not laughed, but okay, I'll tell you one thing. Hold on. When he said, in speaking about Iran, he mentioned three things: their conquest, subjugation, and terror. That made me smile. I thought, oh really, those are the words you're choosing, isn't that interesting? And you would never think to apply them to his own country's actions. So I thought that was very, very telling and very, very interesting.
There were some people who actually, there were several organizations, actually many organizations, but collectively that worked on a campaign called Skip the Speech. And if you'll notice, nearly 60 senators and Congress people chose to skip the speech. You can, Google it. It was a great, over 110,000 Americans wrote letters which we funneled to their elected officials to say this many people in your district are urging you to skip the speech, to reject this, partisan play by Boehner and what was basically a campaign speech by the prime minister 2 weeks before their campaign. So we saw actually a historic change in nobody would have imagined just a few months ago, last summer, when 100 senators voted to send more money to the Iron Dome system, extra above and beyond what we already send. 100% voted for it, and today almost 10% of the senators said, I'm not going to come to this politicized speech. In the back?
Yeah, thank you very much for a beautifully done movie. I really appreciate that. And I love the music too. What I wanted to say is today on my way back from work, I was listening to NPR, and this person, I forgot the name of it, he is a head of French Jewish Foundation or Institute or something like that. He's here to raise the awareness of and the curb anti-Semitism. And what he said was, even though it's a small minority number, the terrorism is done by Muslims, and then it's only done by Muslims. So what is so I looked it up, dictionary definition of terrorism, and there are many different ways to say it. One of them is to influence the policy of government by intimidation or coercion. And what the Israelis' policy, if that's not terrorism, then what is? Why don't we call it what it belongs? How do I say it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well said.
It is a terrorism.
Yes, so just to be clear, anti-Semitism is something that exists in the world. It's existed for a very long time. But I would argue that the policies of the state of Israel and the treatment of the minorities, the indigenous people of Palestine, only adds fuel to that fire. And you're right, terrorism is the use of violence or the threat of violence against a civilian population. And so an argument could be made that the occupation itself fits the definition.
And that term was coined by a German person who had never met a Muslim or an Arab person in 1881 or something like that. I can't remember the name of this person, this German fellow. And it's an oxymoron because Arabs are Semites. And they, that just does not, it has been misused to fulfill a political goal. So, just one last thing. There was an amazing meeting with Amy Goodman. If you can probably Google Democracy Now! With Glenn Greenwald, that he talked about that whole thing, terrorism, and the whole fabrication and invention of terrorism and the media. And fascinating one. If you have the time, look into it and you'll learn something.
Yes.
I had a question about how, especially a lot of the youth, but also the general population. It's pretty clear. It was pretty clear to me that as people have said before, a lot of the conditions they face, while they're specific to their area, millions of people experience that same kind of, marginalization, ghettoization, so to speak, and elimination of cultures. How do people there feel about commonalities with people around the world? Because there is a certain tendency, like even in the United States, to kind of like pull in your tents and like, well, this is my oppression, and I don't care about other people, even if you have the same type of oppression, right? And so I'm wondering, clearly like the female rappers, they have a certain knowledge of hip hop, so the question I have is, while they have their particular situation, how do they feel in terms of what commonalities they have with people around the world who are facing very similar conditions?
I'm gonna just mention one commonality because I don't really see a lot of other commonalities in the world, at least that exist in the time period of the last century and a half. But when a whole bunch of Dutch people landed in South Africa and said all of a sudden, God said this is our home, and the rest of the South Africans did not belong there, that is basically, as far as I can see, the only commonality with the Palestinians, which is the Palestinians were sitting there, and all of a sudden at the end of World War II, a whole bunch of Northern Europeans were just dropped down in the southern Mediterranean, and the British gave them the keys and said, no, this is yours now. Do what you want. And we see what's happened in the last 65 years. Well, when we saw what was happening in South Africa 25 years ago, we had a whole bunch of movements. When we found out what the truth was, all of a sudden everybody in the U.S. went, this is not right. No, we got to change this. Let's have concerts. Let's, do this, do that. And it changed. Well, this is even worse. Nelson Mandela called the South African situation, they were in better shape than the Palestinians were. So when Nelson Mandela describes his own situation and the situation that's happening at the top portion of the continent and says, no, the Palestinians have it worse, why aren't we all just getting together, attaching ourselves to JVP, to films like this, to other movements that are out there and saying, this is wrong, let's just stop it and let's make it right. That's all we have to do, just make it right. We don't have to eliminate people, let's just change it and make it fair.
And I can tell you that the young generation sees it much differently. The intersectionality, we had people from Ferguson, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the Dream Defenders just went on a delegation to Palestine. If you go across town to UCLA, where they passed a divestment resolution, you saw 25 different student organizations from every stretch, African American, Native American, Latino, gay, straight, artists, you name it, all seeing the intersectionality of gentrification, of suppression, of oppression of minorities. It is one struggle, and this is one that, like we keep saying, we are already a part of, because our tax dollars, we give Israel more aid, and it's almost all in the form of weapons to prosecute this occupation. So we're all already a part of it, and it is directly related to all of our struggles, and together we can do something.
And the goal of it is eliminating the Palestinians altogether from, taking them out.
No, I think what you're. Yes, I think that all I can say is that they are in my experience, an extremely compassionate people, extremely hospitable, completely open hearts and homes, and would, Mona was saying we drank a lot of Turkish coffee. Yeah, we knock on doors, go to talk to people. These people didn't have two sticks to rub together, and they would open some floorboard and take out a tin of special cookies and give us their, they had to, that much giving and heart and soul and so much compassion for other people's suffering. The problem is, and I've said this before, but the Palestinians are not unified. I mean, they're separated from one another. They're in all these different sections of the country, and also in other countries as refugees. They can't see each other, talk to each other, communicate, and so they're even, as Abdu was saying, separated amongst themselves. And I had one young Palestinian girl come to me after a screening in Qatar, and she said, she was 18 years old. She said, I can't go to Akka, but I live in the West Bank, but I can go to, abroad. And I always thought that the people in Akka had it easy, they had it better, because they're Israeli citizens, and they don't really understand what our oppression and what our struggle is. And she said, now I realize it's all the same. It's all the same. Thank you. Now I want to go there. Now I want to communicate with them. That's part of it. So I think there's a huge heart there. But when politics has separated the people amongst themselves so greatly and so deeply, it's really hard to solidify.
There are nonetheless some organizations now that are developing some momentum. There's Zahrot, there's breaking the silence, and I think the Palestinians are starting to develop the confidence, like you're saying, younger people. On my last trip, I spent some time in Birzeit University in the West Bank, and there is a lot of reticence, but there is some momentum, and that is actually really how it's going to be accomplished, is when people start to see each other's point of view, and the all sides say enough, let's make it work, let's all live together. And
It's still a big risk to speak out.
So Zochrot is Zochrot, and Breaking the Silence are two Israeli organizations that are working, Zochrot, to map out what existed and to talk about the Nakba, the catastrophe, and get the history out there. And Breaking the Silence are a bunch of soldiers, some of them are now my friends, who got out of the military and decided that they needed to have a venue where soldiers could talk about what they did because they were so haunted by what they did. And, they have a very specific mission, and they do it, and they do it well. And they both have websites. You can Google them both. Yeah.
Just more on that, and also what you mentioned, there is a lot of collaboration between people in the Palestinian solidarity community and other global struggles, specifically indigenous struggles. He mentioned the female rappers. There's actually, if you look up this Rolling Stones article, there is a piece done on this Chilean indigenous rapper and her collaboration with a very prominent Palestinian rapper named Shadia Mansour. And this is the kind of stuff you see happening a lot. They were introduced by an Iraqi rapper who raps a lot about, imperialism, American occupation, Palestine, all different kinds of things. So there is a lot of that, and a lot of them are starting to see, it's not the same, but a lot of commonalities between other indigenous struggles. So that would be something to look up. And there is a group that does a lot of that cultural, political work, and they're called Existence is Resistance, Al-Wujud Muqawama, for any Arabic speakers. That's a great thing to point out.
The gentleman in the hat.
Well, as long as we're talking, I'm from the South Bronx, the home of rap.
Do you have a question for the filmmakers?
I do. So the Palestinian Authority's official position, right, is a two-state solution as an end of conflict. So if that was to happen, would their struggle transform into a civil rights issue, or what is the end game for the 1948 Palestinians if there's a two-state solution?
Being that nobody hears from the Palestinian Authority,
Not asking.
I guess I could quickly tell you that whether or not the Palestinian Authority, if you talk to many Palestinians, they might tell you that they don't actually represent them. Their term of office has long since expired. They were put in office basically by America and Israel to.
My question is whether or not they perceive the two-state solution is the end of conflict.
There are Palestinians.
The 1948 Palestinians.
So I've talked to Palestinians. I can't speak for people, but I can tell you that I've talked to Palestinians who are 48 Palestinians who are West Bank Palestinians. I have friends whose families are from Gaza. I have tons of Palestinian friends in the diaspora, and there are Palestinians who believe in a two-state solution. There are Palestinians who believe in one person, one vote.
What I'm asking, in the making of the film, did it come up in your conversations in making the film that if there was a two-state solution, then what would the folks in Akka, how would they resolve their struggle? Would it become a civil rights issue, or is there some other end game? It doesn't have to be unanimous, that's my question.
We didn't go there. We really didn't go there. We what we found generally, at least in Akka, and I'm sure Patrick has more to say, but the bottom line was, we don't care if you call it Israel. We're used to being invaded. We don't care what you call it, as long as we have our rights, as long as we're treated equally. So we didn't really delve any more than that.
Also, the two-state solution died soon after Oslo. There were a lot of hopes. And if there is any progress at this point, I'm a one-stater. That's just my personal opinion. And but we didn't get in. To answer your question, I think we didn't get into that conversation with the people of Akka. We didn't discuss that.
I think our time is close to being. No, we're okay.
No, I just wanted to comment.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Sorry. I worked in Haifa at a research institute that focuses on the political, economic, and social conditions of 48 Palestinians. And as it stands, it's always been a civil rights issue for them, whether or not there will be a one-state or two-state solution. I understood your question well, so I was waiting.
I think also, they're not treated as equal citizens, and that's what we tried to portray in the film, is that no matter what, they're disenfranchised, and there's big limitations, and there is discrimination, clearly.
Young lady?
Yeah, so I was just interested in how many college campuses has the movie been screened on so far? And in particular, are you scheduled to have a screening in any of the UC campuses, especially in light of the passing of the BDS movement in the UC system?
We've been working on colleges and universities around the United States. So far, we have been to, as far as UC campuses, UCSD and UCLA a couple of weeks ago. As far as other college campuses, there's this one. We were at Harvard. I was at Harvard last week, where we had a wonderful session. Georgetown and who else? Columbia have also invited us, but it probably won't be till next fall because the school year is now waning. There are other colleges like the University of Chicago, University of Texas, University of Arizona. We're working on Berkeley, but it's sort of difficult. Remember, this is a passion project, so that we're not doing this in our getting paid to do this. So whenever we have our spare time, namely me, that's when I'm making my phone calls to all of these places. So we would be more than happy to play at any college or any university, wherever, because having these kinds of discussions and getting the opportunity to have an audience see this film and decide for themselves, that's where people start to make a change.
Yeah, and I will say, not to gossip, but a couple universities canceled right after the incidents in Paris of Charlie Hebdo, not wanting to show a pro-Arab piece, feeling like it was too sensitive, which is another repercussion of, freedom of speech, right?
Yeah, right.
So we're really, really, really thankful for your school and the other schools who have opened their hearts and their minds and wanted to, take a look at this and share a part of it. So, thank you.
Where can people see this? I really need my brother to see this film.
I'll give you a card, but you can go to Amazon. You can order a DVD, or you can download the film through instant download. You can go to Hulu. You could go to Vimeo and download it. You could go to Best Buy and order it. There's a whole lot of places where you can see the film. So, but I will recommend one of the best websites is not necessarily our film website. That's really just information about the film. If you go to our Facebook page, that is a tremendous compendium of information that you could go back day after day after day for the last year and a half and find out so many interesting things. So if you go, whatever it is, Google, It's Better to Jump Facebook. And, like us on Facebook, become a part of it, because that's the other part of it that's so fantastic. But for any of your friends, if you want to go, God, this would be good for you to find out about, go to this Facebook page and just start looking. Yeah. It really is a great educational point.
Last question, the gentleman in the hat.
Yes, I applaud and I thank you for making such a fantastic film to show the humanity of the Palestinian, that Israel have tried so hard for so many years to dehumanize them in a sense, and I would love to see much more than that. Did Israel at least assist you in any way or in any other ways to make your work easy in there, or did they cause any other troubles like you usually do against anything Palestinian, but anything pro-Israel, they will have funds and stuff?
We did not have any problems with the State of Israel or the municipality of Akka. We did not go and announce ourselves as we're making this film about the Palestinians of Akka either. We didn't have a tremendous crew when we were shooting these things, so our footprint was not that noticeable. I suppose if we showed up with a big truck and a whole lot of people and we were disrupting things, we probably would have gotten some problems, but
And you know,
fortunately it all worked out.
And the jumping sequences were shot with a lot more cameras. We had around 7 cameras for the jumping sequences, but it's so photographed by people from all over the world that they didn't really notice. So we blended in. It was really the 3 of us and maybe 1 other person. And even if we're tall and blonde, it didn't matter. There's lots of people roaming around Israel.
And the point is to show the humanity, because we all have it, and it's the beautiful part of all human beings, that at the end of the day, what we want for our children is what we want for everybody else's children, and it's a really, really important thing to fight for or preserve, because there is a beautiful cultural heritage to the Palestinian people. It's very, very old, and it's very diverse, and it's being destroyed in a very, very vicious way. And me being Palestinian, having learned about it as I've, in these last few years, I've developed a deep appreciation. Just like in all cultures, we all have wonderful things to share and to celebrate versus destroy. So thank you all for coming. And thank you, Estee.
Can we have another round of applause for these wonderful filmmakers, Gina and Mouna and Patrick?